Welcome to Marina Middle. Honor to host this event tonight. On behalf of everybody at Marina, all of our children, I would like to say once again, welcome, bienvenidos, y ni hao. Thank you very much.
Welcome to tonight's Town Hall meeting, Public Education, Funding Our Future. Thank you so much to Marina Middle School and Principal Aileen Murphy for hosting us generously tonight and allowing us to come time after time to make sure this event went off well. So thank you. My name's Crystal Brown, and I could not be more proud to be a public school parent in San Francisco tonight. We had two very specific goals for this event. The first one was to mobilize a very strong and powerful parent voice in San Francisco, and this is proof that we're well on our way.
But more importantly, we want to fund this gap, and we're here tonight to come up with real solutions to funding this $113 million budget deficit that we have. The idea for this town hall came to us via a teacher, Ms. Kat Klein at Sherman. It was orchestrated by 6 Sherman moms, myself, Erica Hunt, Linda Schaefer, Michelle Parker, Cece Kaufman, and Holly Carver. From schools across this district that made this happen. So we want to absolutely not take credit where it's not due. Everyone had a hand in it, so thank you. I think there are over 1,000 people here tonight, which when I wrote this seemed scary, but now it's a little overwhelming. We represent over 125 different schools around the city, and we may not speak the same language, we may not live in the same neighborhood, but we are sending the same powerful message to the leaders of our city and state tonight. Every child in this city deserves the right to a bright future, and that future begins with education. As parents, we are the ones that are going to have to look in our kids' eyes and tell them there is no more money for library books, school supplies, or field trips. But even worse,
we are going to have to tell them that teacher that they've come to love and know
past year is no longer at their school because there's not enough money to fund that teacher. There's no more money left for that reading specialist who made sure that in first grade every child was proficient in reading. This is unacceptable. We are going to tell our leaders we do not want to watch the crippling of our society for years to come. But let me be clear. We did not organize this event to point fingers. Everyone in this room needs to take some responsibility for solving this crisis. We also did not organize this event to discuss how deep the cuts will be. Most of us know just how devastating it is to have an underfunded school. We are here to find real solutions that will last us for years to come, period. We are parents and we're voters. We are parents and we are voters, and tonight we're taking action. Enough is enough. We must solve this crisis. We must fund our future. Thank you. Who's going to explain the format for tonight. Thank you.
So, I mean, I could.
Thank you, Crystal. In planning this event, we realized that it wasn't just a government issue, but this crisis is also a community issue. And so in order for us to be successful, we realized that we had to include all segments of our community to find real solutions. As we began forming the panel, we had this amazing outpouring of support from many of the very high-profile leaders in our community. So we had to get creative about the format of the event, which is how we ended up with a city panel, a state panel, and our special guests who are seated here in the front row. The city and state panels will explore what our elected officials are doing to bridge the gap, and the special guests will bring in perspectives from each of their areas of expertise. We have the teachers represented, the parents, business, academia, and nonprofits. We also thought
it was important that we capture the great ideas that are going to come out of this event so we can follow up on them. We have note takers here who are going to be charting everything because our work is not finished tonight. It's just beginning. Paramount to this discussion is the person who's going to keep us on track for a results-oriented conversation, the moderator. Playing this important role for us tonight is the award-winning host of KQED's Forum, Dr. Michael Krasny. In addition to hosting Forum, Dr. Krasny is a professor of English at San Francisco State University, a widely published published scholar, critic, and writer. During his career, he has interviewed many of the leading change agents of our time, including Cesar Chavez, Rosa Parks, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and Gloria Steinem. So it naturally follows that Dr. Krasny would want to be at the forefront of the parent movement here in San Francisco, that he would want to guide the conversation that develops a plan for bridging this funding gap and creating a sustainable structure that can support education statewide. Dr. Krasny, thank you for helping us begin to reach our goals. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Michael Krasny.
Thank you all, and congratulations, because what you're doing here I think is going to be very important, and not only in terms of the solidarity that's so evident in the showing of so many concerned people, but also the commitment to really doing something about a crisis. And it is a crisis that we have. That's why we're looking toward funding for the future this evening. And I think that Holly and the others have done an extraordinary job, and they've outlined what we have before us, how to, first of all, make up the $113 million gap, but also really how to plan for the future and how to get a statewide mobilization going. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the panelists, and we have some real leaders here this evening, and we're proud to tell you that we have assembled really a pretty distinguished panel. We're going to talk first, as I think was evident by the remarks you just heard, with those who represent the city and county of San Francisco, and then we're going to talk with state leaders. And we have some folks who have been assembled right in the front here who are special guests who I'll be going to with both of the panels at different occasions. I want to give a little bit of background here. In fact, I was asked to do this as a kind of overview of the landscape of what we face here in California. Right now, as many of you know, we're talking about this state as the 8th largest economy in the world, but in education and spending, it ranks 47th. And to give you some idea of just how we've suffered decline, about 35 years ago it was 19th. Public education in this state is largely funded by the state. It's tied to sales and income tax. And the revenue from sales and income tax, they can both have big swings, and they do indeed, from year to year. So school districts tend to be often limited in the ways that they can raise money. Some cities and districts, like San Francisco, as many of you know, have helped fund the gap by passing parcel taxes and creating foundations and aggressively fundraising. And we're not talking about raising funds for extras here, by the way. We're talking about raising funds for the basics. The San Francisco Unified School District's budget has been cut at least 25%. That's $113 million over the next 2 years. And I don't have to tell you how grim this looks, but as I said, by the faces I see here, by the commitment I see here, by the kind of zeal, frankly, that I see here, I'm very hopeful indeed. Let me tell you who is going to be participating in this evening, and we're going to talk about everything probably over the course that really highlights the landscape of funding, going to talk about Proposition 98, Proposition 13, certainly also Propositions G and H and A, but really talk mainly about two things. How can we best mobilize? How can we simply ameliorate this budget deficit and shortfall that we have? And how can we set a political action group, sort of a populist political action group, into motion? Let me introduce, first of all, well, a number of these people need no introductions, but you will welcome, I hope, the mayor of San Francisco, also the father of Montana Tessa. Gavin Newsom has been mayor of San Francisco since 2004, was a member of the Board of Supervisors for 7 years, recently filed for intent to run for lieutenant governor of California, and I want to say one more thing about Mayor Newsom. He hosted the internet-based budget town hall back on February 24th to talk about San Francisco's $522 million shortfall for the 2010-2011 years. And welcome, Gavin. Let me also welcome the President of the Board of Supervisors, a supervisor since 2008, criminal prosecutor at the San Francisco DA office, and civil rights attorney David Chu. And the superintendent of the San Francisco Unified School District since 2007, 11 years serving as superintendent, including Fresno and Clark County, Nevada, and past principal at Horace Mann Middle School, a teacher, a principal, and administrator, also a vice president at McGraw-Hill, Superintendent Carlos Garcia. We also have with us this evening Commissioner Jane Kim, who is with the San Francisco Unified School District's Board of Education since 2006. Currently, she serves as president and is running for District 6 supervisor. She's also a civil rights attorney. Welcome, Commissioner Jane Kim. Now, before I introduce our state panelists, which I will do momentarily, I want to make note of the fact that both Senators Mark Leno and Senator Leland Yee are running a bit late, so they will join us on stage. But we do have some distinguished people who are invited, as I said, as special guests who will be going to in the course of conversation this evening. The Deputy Director of EdSource, which is a respected source for K-12 education information, research, analysis, and data since 1993, known for her experience in the California schools, in finance, and a study project director for the landmark Getting Down to Facts. Mary Perry, would you rise and have people welcome you? And also in that front row of special guests is the Director of Legislation for California State PTA, 4 years serving as legislative advocate for California PTA and as president of British Columbia Confederation of Parent Advisory Councils. Nice to have some expertise from up north. Currently campaign director for the Pleasanton Cultural Arts Foundation. Please welcome Debbie Look. And we also have in the front row the new executive director for the San Francisco School Alliance, which is a civic organization that works to guide and support the improvement agendas for the San Francisco Unified School District. A 10-year state superintendent of public instruction up in Washington, head of Washington Commission on Student Learning, and a leader of the development of Washington's academic standards and assessment systems, a teacher, a school counselor, Terry Bergeson. If you haven't gleaned the fact that this is an embarrassment of riches here in terms of the people we have here, rest assured there's even more to come. We have the President of the United Educators of San Francisco with 30 years experience on the executive board and as a union officer, English teacher, active with the UESF affiliates, Dennis Kelly. And the Senior Vice President for Public Policy at the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, former Deputy City Attorney, fourth generation San Franciscan, Executive Deputy Mayor for Finance and Administration for Mayor Feinstein, and Chief of Staff in the Office of the Mayor in 1992, Jim Lazarus. Now, let me introduce the state panel. I mentioned the Senators Leno and Yee are running late, but we have with us Assemblywoman Fiona Ma, who's been in the State Assembly since 2006, currently is the Majority Whip, and serves on the Assembly's Higher Education Committee and Revenue and Taxation Committee, and spent 4 years on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Fiona Ma. Finally, suffering with the common cold, but nevertheless here this evening, member of the State Assembly since 2008, member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors for 14 years, San Francisco United School District Board of Education for 4 years.
You have to sit. It's your tie. Oh. It's
Tom, do you want to hear the rest of your bona fides, or can we just let things rest at that? No, oh. Actually, civil rights leader, stand-up comic, educator, and the author of the Rainy Day Fund. And a member of the Assembly's Appropriations, Arts, Education, and Human Services Committee. Tom Amiano, also making the world safe once again for marijuana. Okay.
Yeah, seriously. Only in San Francisco.
Welcome to all of you, and you've heard the ground rules, you've heard what we're about this evening, and you heard what we'd like to accomplish. So let us begin, and let me begin, if I may, Mayor Newsom, with you. And what I'm going to do is actually speak with each of the members of the panels in seriatim and ask questions and move questions back and forth. After we do our 2 half-hour panels, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions specifically or generally to the panels. But Mayor Newsom has certainly demonstrated a great deal of skill, as many of you know, for bringing people together to solve tough situations. Let's talk about what has been designated as your 30-day plan for bringing this community together to bridge the $113 million.
Well, first, the perfunctory thank you to all of you for taking the time to be here. It's quite an extraordinary turnout. I expected nothing less, though then again, looking out, it is quite impressive. And I think it goes to the magnitude of the challenge at hand. $113 million shortfall at this district, a notification process that just began this week, 900 layoffs, an extraordinary amount. This on the back of a year where it seems like, Carlos, we were talking about those 500 layoff notices that went out this time last year, and another unprecedented shortfall goes on and on and on. Of course, I sit here as mayor of San Francisco wearing a different hat, a $522.2 million shortfall and a $1.2 billion general fund budget. And we're about to, on March 5th, put out our layoff notices, which I can assure you will make the school district's problems pale in comparison. So that's the backdrop, self-evident to each and every one of you. And I know the purpose of tonight is not to focus as much on the problem, but the solution. The challenge is self-evident. The City and County of San Francisco is not the primary funding body for the San Francisco Unified School District. That, however, does not mitigate in any significant way our responsibility to support this school district. And as many of you know, we have established formally and informally partnerships with this school district that I believe are an envy for other cities across not only the state but the nation. We have a memorandum of understanding with this school district. We call it a partnership for achievement that spells out in detail our respective roles and responsibilities, not as city leaders, as policymakers for the school districts, but as partners. We have established a framework with the strong leadership and support of then Supervisor Tom Amiano and the overwhelming endorsement of the voters and the leadership of Dennis Kelly and the union and others of setting aside tens of millions of dollars a year pursuant to Proposition H to guarantee funding for sports and libraries and arts and music and other needs within the school district. And in so many ways, you can imagine where we'd be had we not had that strong support from the city. But now you need us more than ever at a time when we're not necessarily in the position, as we have been in the past, to provide resources. Last year, $24 million was taken from the Rainy Day Reserve and transferred to the school district. It substantially addressed some of those layoffs. This year, with the leadership of Supervisor Bevan Dufty, who took the time to be here, this year we'll be processing next week only $6 million, but nonetheless $6 million that will be made available to address some of these challenges and certainly address the shortfall. And I don't think that's insignificant under the circumstances, but clearly not as much as we've had in the past. So where does that leave us? And I'll close with this because I see we have a lot of people on this panel. It leaves us with a recognition that we have to think more creatively and we have to act more creatively. Sure, we have to play defense, and you'll hear from our state representatives about how we'll do that to block some of these cuts. But then we're going to have to play offense. And I would argue, and I hope tonight we have the chance to dialogue about the opportunity to play offense this November by considering what we have been processing with discussions with the union, with discussions with the superintendent, members of the Board of Supervisors, and that's the prospect of a parcel tax this November that could substantially help address this year's budget shortfall.
Thank you, Mayor Newsom. And let me go to Supervisor Chu next. President Chu, city investments in education, sales tax, rainy day fund, Proposition H have certainly helped support the San Francisco schools. What do you envisage? What do you see in terms of helping bridge this, again, devastating gap from the perspective of the Board of Supervisors?
Thank you, Michael, and I also again want to thank all of you for being out here tonight. As the mayor said, at the city and county, we do not have direct purview over our school district, but suffice it to say, I know that every single one of my colleagues believes that the future of our schools really is the future of our city. And I also want to acknowledge, I know Supervisor Dufty is here, Supervisor Eric Marr, who was on the school board and is a parent, is here in the audience as well. We are all thinking very hard on creative solutions to move this forward. Mayor Newsom referred to our rainy day fund, and I want to again thank Tom Amiano for your foresight when you were at the Board of Supervisors. And the mayor mentioned that last year we were able to avert layoffs. This year with $6 million, that is not enough money to do what needs to happen. I'm actually meeting with some city staff tomorrow to talk about how to stabilize the future of the rainy day fund so we can figure out ways, not necessarily this year, but in the future, for us not to deplete those funds as quickly, to put more money into those funds so that we have monies for rainy days or rainy years or rainy decades like the one that we have. The mayor also referred to the potential of a parcel tax, and I have told my friends at the school district and the mayor's office that I am very happy to help champion that from the perspective of the board. I think that you would get very significant support from the board on this. The city is facing tremendous challenges in many, many areas, but we can't think of something more important than trying to figure out how to avert the layoffs of 900 members of our education staff here.
Are you working carefully with the Board of Education? I just wanted to get you on the record on that.
We actually had conducted some meetings a number of months ago and had considered a potential parcel tax in the context of November. These are difficult issues. You require a 2/3 vote by the voters to get this done. Very, very difficult. And I say that because if we're going to do it in November 2010, we are going to need every single one of you to be lockstep with the policymakers and with our teachers to make this happen, and I hope we can make that happen.
Thank you. Thank you, President Chu. I want to go now to Superintendent Garcia, and maybe you might talk, if you would, Superintendent Garcia, about how many of the parents here can directly help influence what can be done about budget cuts and how you're going to include them in terms of the whole decision-making process.
Well, you know, it's funny because, first of all, I want to thank everybody for being at a great school of ours here. The community is, I think, the most important ingredient in helping this. Now, the city, the district, it's out of our control. I think it's time for the parents to start getting together, and we need to make sure that Sacramento, and particularly our governor, starts hearing our voices, that we cannot, you know, and we have to really work together to not cannibalize one another. None of us, the school board, myself, none of us take pride in what we're having to do, but if we don't do it, the state takes over us. And then they'll make all the decisions. We don't take pride in giving out layoff notices. That's the worst thing we could ever do, or even be talking about class sizes or anything like that. All of that is horrible stuff. So if we don't stand up for our children, who will? You know, it's time. Everybody talks this to death. It's time for action. It's time to say, we're not putting up with this. And we need to get other communities. San Francisco can't do it by itself. We need to get other communities, the PTAs across the entire state. Everybody needs to say, we're mad as hell and we're not going to put up with it anymore. They put school districts and cities, they get, the crumbs are left. I know we're in an economic recession. I know the problems there. But we cannot put all the problems on the back of children. We're becoming a national disgrace in California. And I as a Californian and as a San Francisco, if no one else is going to stand up for us, then let's start it ourselves. And if it takes us suing the state on an adequacy lawsuit, then let's all stand together to do that.
Superintendent Garcia, I'd like to follow up. I feel like I'm a weak second act here with a follow-up question, but talk about what you're doing to leverage partnerships, because I know there's a lot of plans, again, to get civic and educational, nonprofit, and business. And maybe we can hear, Jim Lazarus, from you following what the superintendent has to say about this.
I'll tell you what's great is that, we're blessed here in San Francisco that we have a lot of community-based organizations. In fact, we had meetings with some of them today. We're all, they're being cut. The city's being cut. DCYF is being cut. So this is a great opportunity for all of us to join together because none of us can do this alone. So we're all going to stand. We're already meeting. We have started a long time ago, actually. But now this kicks it up a notch. It makes us figure out how are we going to do things in a smarter, more effective way. We're reaching out to the community. I'm glad the School Alliance is here. The Ed Fund is here. People who are standing up and the volunteers. We need to start working together to say, to go out to businesses. We have this great financial district here in San Francisco. When are they going to start anteing up? In all due respect, I'm supportive of business and everything, but if they have their businesses here, then they need to be part of this community. They need to be engaged in supporting the community. And so we are going to be working closely. If a Warren Hellman could stand up for children, why isn't everybody else standing up for children? We have over 25 billionaires in this area. Come on down. If you believe in our own future, then you got to show it. And you just can't talk about it, but we have to show it with action. So we are organizing businesses. Businesses, I will tell you, and foundations are stepping up with us. They're coming together to say, what can we do? And we have to be strategic because they're not going to give us all the money to save everything. They don't have those resources, but they can contribute to help us organize campaigns, help us organize to be able to do things that push Sacramento, because ultimately Sacramento needs to act.
Thank you. Jim, could I put you on the hot seat here for a moment? Talk about where the business community is in pushing the governor and the legislature to not only protect education from more cuts, but maybe to get some lobbying going that will really make an impact. Jim Lazarus is going to be here.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for special guests. I think the business community in San Francisco has been there in the past, it will be there now, and will be there in the future on these issues, whether it's bond issues in the past, parcel taxes in the past. We've unified with the Unified School District in getting those through. We're going to go forward in November. The business community will be there as part of the partnership with business, with Dennis Kelly and the unions, with our state and local elected officials to try to get that 2/3 vote. That takes it to Sacramento. It won't have us in November, but there's a petition going around to change the Constitution to get rid of the 2/3 vote requirement. I think that local control ballot measure, the 55% threshold for parcel taxes, is one the San Francisco business community will support as well. So we're with you.
And before we hear from Jane Kim, can I go to you, Terry Burgessson, because the superintendent mentioned San Francisco School Alliance, and I'd like to know, maybe if I could, from you, how the Alliance is redefining its goals to support the budget gaps at school sites, and really what you're doing, again, in terms of partnerships.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I'm just delighted to be here tonight. I'm a new citizen to California. I've been here 6 weeks, but this is my city now, and this is my state. And our students in our district are my students now. The Alliance hired me because of my educational leadership up north in Washington State, my knowledge of policy, and also my willingness to fight for the funds for public school funding. So just by bringing me in, they know what they got when they got me. And we are looking at how do we... I'm so proud of Superintendent Garcia and of Richard Carranza, his second in command, because they are keeping their eye on the children in this district and the outcomes that should be excellent outcomes for the future of California through those children and their lives. So we have to do two things. We have to fix the funding, and while we're in this trouble, we have to keep our eye on the ball of the results for kids across every section of the city of San Francisco. We can't leave the kids behind with the skills that they have. So I think foundations, when they see the moves that the district is making, not the negative side that we've been talking about or what they have to do with the funding, but the positive improvements that have happened in this district and the forward focus of that the board and the superintendent are doing, they will be willing to gather, and they can't fill that gap. There has to be a school level strategy, and we're working with some of the parents who have ideas about how to match PTA fundraising with corporate money, how to look at ways at the immediate level. We're looking at some kind of coalescing of the foundations around the major initiatives to help us come through this crisis strong. But clearly, the problem is a state problem. And if every single auditorium in the state of California were filled like this with parents and interested community people, all of those rules that you guys talked about would be changed fast, and we will be part of that as much as we can.
Thank you, Terry. I'd like to bring Commissioner Jane Kim in this again, who is President of the Board of Education. And Jane Kim, you're looking at some pretty tough things now: furloughs, class size increases, layoffs, grade level splits. Is there a triage? Is there a priority?
This is not the first year that we've had to make budget cuts. We make budget cuts every year. And every year we cut things that we absolutely need. So when we talk about protecting funding in the classrooms first, that is absolutely the priority of the board. But with that comes a lot of support from the classroom, and that's what people often talk about. So it's often a debate of, Carlos likes to say, am I going to cut off my right arm today, or am I going to cut off my left arm? These are the types of decisions that we have to make. I do want to talk about what I'm committed to in this budget-making decision process, though. But first of all, I want to recognize that the entire Board of Education is here. And if they could stand, we have Commissioner Yee, Commissioner Rachel Norton, Commissioner Kim Shree-Moffis, Commissioner Jill Wins, and also Commissioner Sandra Fewer, and Vice President Hydra Mendoza. I'm not sure where she is. So let me say a couple of things. When we started our board meetings this year, and I said this actually this morning when we had a convening of some of our community-based organizations in some of our schools, I said that 2010 is a year of collaboration for SFUSD. One, we have to, because we're headed towards the largest financial catastrophe that we've seen in SFUSD in decades. And two, in many ways, we've always had to. The best way that we can do instructional reform and make quality schools can only happen if we partner with our parents, our community-based organizations, our city, and of course our state. So here's a couple of things that other folks have mentioned, but on a state level, because we realize that this is a state issue, right? In SFUSD this year, 2009 through 2010, our per pupil expenditure was $6,542.28. So there's already an issue here. We're already going from a little place to an even smaller place, right? In states like New York and in New Jersey, they spend maybe $15,000 per student. So this is a state issue. We absolutely need to reform the state. We need to pass a simple majority on budget and tax revenues in Sacramento, and this is something that we need to do together. And as Tom Amiano has introduced at the Assembly, we need to split roll and reform Proposition 13. And I have to tell you, even if we have the support of all of our state elected officials here, the elected officials in Sacramento are not going to do it. We have to make that change. They are not going to make that change unless we demand it. And in many ways, although we've had to cut the budget by little pieces and little pieces every year, in this crisis, I think that there's an opportunity for us to be very angry about the state of the funding of our education. And we really need to fight to make sure that this changes not just for next year or the next 2 years, but for the long term. We need to increase revenue for state public education. So on a local level, and again, I do want to thank Assemblyman Amiano because he introduced 2 city legislations that supported the city investing in our public education. Again, these are our funds going to the city that invest our schools, and that was Proposition H and the Rainy Day Fund.
That was work.
And I think that it's important that we work on a local parcel tax together, but this is where everyone here in the room comes in again. We're doing the polling in terms of the amount that voters think that they can pass to get a 2/3 vote. And in many ways for us to get the local parcel tax as it's being discussed may only replace what we currently get from Proposition H from the city. So it's not necessarily going to solve our current budget issues. It's going to replace money. So we need to make sure that we're talking to our neighbors and our community to fight for a larger proportion that is progressive, a progressive parcel tax. So on a local level, here's what I'm personally committed to. I'm personally committed to listening to both the district's recommendations for budget reductions, but also listening to other community proposals that may and probably will be presented over the next month. I'm also committed to making our budget process as transparent as possible. So if there are numbers that the community are requesting, let me know, let the Board of Education members know, let the superintendent know. We will put it out and put it in a public and also understandable manner. I know that's very actually challenging even for us because I have a challenging time understanding all the terminology that we use in our budget. But any way that you can give us feedback on how we can make the budget transparent and understandable to you, that is our job. That is what we need to do. And the third is to do it in a time manner that allows enough time for community input. So that is what I am committed to in terms of how we prioritize budget reductions for next year.
Thank you, Jane Kim. We're now going to turn our attention to how things are operating from the state. And I want to introduce the 2 state senators who joined us. Probably both need no introduction, but State Senator since 2008 and 6-year member of the State Assembly, 4.5 years on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and now serving on the Senate's Appropriations Committee and Budget and Fiscal Review Committee. Mark Leno is with us. And in the State Senate since 2006, 4 years in the State Assembly, 6 years on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and 8 years on the San Francisco Unified School District Board of Education, where he fought for lower class size and fiscal responsibility, a child psychologist and educator, had 4 children go through the San Francisco Unified School District, and serves on the Senate Appropriations, Human Services, and Labor and Industrial Relations Committee. Please welcome Leland Yee. So let me begin by asking the 4 state representatives here if they could talk in general about what revenue measures are going to be proposed from Sacramento to bridge this gap and what you hope will actually be brought in terms of sort of, I don't know, call it carrying forward on this tangibly and specifically. Tom, you want to begin?
Sure. Thank you all for being here. And the superintendent said it correctly. We are blessed in San Francisco. We do have a populist streak. We like to take things in our own hands, and we've been tremendously supportive of public education. And you don't know what a gift that is. Even though we are suffering today, There are other districts throughout the state who don't have this kind of collective consciousness or motivation or are disenfranchised. Years ago, my daughter was a student at Horace Mann, and Carlos Garcia was the principal, and I recognized in those days his great potential, and I'm so happy that he is superintendent today because he's more of an activist than he ever lets on, and we need that. We definitely need that. And Senator Yee, here we are again. We spent many, many hours in the 90s on the Board of Education, interestingly enough, fighting these very same battles. Times were not as bad, but they were bad. We tried to look ahead. We were held back by bureaucracy, many other issues, but we're continuing the fight. You know, in Sacramento, it's easy to play the name game. You know, we have a governor who's disengaged and not caring about public education. We may have a new lieutenant governor. I don't know where I heard that, but and we have a minority party that's intransient. In the old days, you know, when Willie Brown was Speaker of the House, you could engage the Republican Party. They seem not to be as, pardon me, I don't mean to offend anybody, but as cultish as they are today. And don't want to look as don't want to be the adults in the room as we often are here in San Francisco and say, hell, nobody wants to pay more taxes or a parcel tax or whatever. But we will, you know, if we see the return. Of course, the return in our minds is, you know, our children, and there could be no more gratification than that. So, and frankly, you know, the four of us sometimes, you know, things get so busy and so scattered up there. The four of us sometimes are not on the same page. And, you know, that's going to be easily remedied after tonight, I am sure. Sometimes we vote differently for very principled reasons. Because some of the choices we have are, it's like, who's your favorite Menendez brothers? You know, do you vote to defer some payments so that 98 does not suffer? And believe me, it's public education, and Prop 98 is under attack every day, every hour. That is the governor's goal, is to get rid of Prop 98, and he does have supporters in the legislature, and we have to turn that over. And I know working together that we can. You know, you have to think out of the box when you're looking at what we have. Getting rid of the two-thirds majority, you know, there's going to be two initiatives. You'll probably see signature gatherers. One is for a two-thirds majority to pass the budget, and if the budget is, lowering the two-thirds majority to pass the budget. If the budget isn't passed, then we don't get paid. And then the other one is to lower the two-thirds majority, not only for passing the budget, but also for raising taxes. So, you know, vote your conscience. I'm sure there's plenty of web pages out there with all kinds of information on that. That's something tangible that we might even be able to do in November. Sometimes you have to look at the context. We have term limits. That ain't good for any city. We really need to look at revising our term limits, because what happens is the lobbyists are the institutional memory there, and you don't want that, believe me. So I think there might be something not self-serving to us, but for in the future that would expand term limits. Two ideas of the many that I've come up with. Yes, is the decriminalization and regulation and taxation of marijuana. And you know, there is an initiative. There is an initiative on the ballot, and one of the reasons I introduced legislation is so that we could have some control over what happens through that initiative. Because, we're estimating $1.5 billion. A lot of that can go to education. A lot of that can go to drug education, all to be determined. But if it's not on the table, then we're in stasis. And the second thing that Commissioner Kim mentioned was the split roll. You know, for too long, Prop 13 has held all of us hostage. For too long, it has suffocated us. For too long, it has oppressed us. And it doesn't matter what your class background is or what your race is. We're all screwed, and it's time to unscrew it. we'll need your help. And we'll need your help on that too, because it's very, very complicated. But I have started the conversation and introduced the bill to close the loopholes. And I do want to say I have, over my this is 20 years now, I've been in elected office in San Francisco, and I've had my tussles with the business community, but we've all kind of learned to live with each other, and I respect that. And they have pitched in when we've asked, and I know they will continue to do so. So thank you very much.
Are you going to tell us which Menendez brothers are your favorite? No. Fiona Ma, let me go to you next. A lot of parents wonder how they can influence state politics. Could you talk to that? I mean, how they can most directly or in some way make an impact as state politics go?
Yeah, thank you. And thank all of you for coming out tonight. It really is very heartening. We are all in this together. None of us, we all served at the local level, and I am very honored to be serving with such veterans and learning from them. But none of us got elected to make cuts. I am in my third year, halfway through my term of office, and I haven't seen a surplus yet, and I probably won't see a surplus before I leave the Assembly. And it is very painful to make these tough choices, and I think the best way for parents to get involved is to show up at meetings like this. San Francisco, we are very lucky because parents and community members are very involved, and we're not scared to show how we feel and speak up and fight the fight. But not all parents around the state are doing the same thing. In Sacramento, we need you to help us lobby the governor. And as Tom Ammiano said, the governor does not like Prop 98. He's trying to go back and see whether we need to get refunds from Prop 98 so that we don't have to fund more. And we are fighting him on Prop 98, on the maintenance factor, and we're doing all that we can to make sure that we don't make cuts to the public schools. I am a product of public schools. My mother taught art at a public school for 20 years. On the Board of Supervisors, I supported Tom Ammiano's Rainy Day Fund and the Prop H. I supported every school bond, parcel tax, free preschool for all. So I am 100% behind you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
So we need you to help us with the governor, and the governor responds to public pressure. Okay. Every time we are mentioned in a newspaper article or an op-ed or a letter to the editor, we get a little Google alert. And then we go and see what the article is about. And we need you to call out the governor, to ask him why he's attacking public schools, why he's trying to balance the budget on the backs of our youth, the future of our country. How are we going to compete? How are we going to provide the future for our young people if he keeps cutting and attacking public schools? So we need you to do that publicly. The faxes, phone calls, we don't know whether he's hearing that. He's never in Sacramento, right? He's smoking a stogie in his jacuzzi. That's how he deals with this budget deficit. Okay, so we need you to call him out publicly.
Let me go to one of our panelists in the front before we hear from the other two senators, Yee and Leno. Dennis Kelly is here, President of United Educators of San Francisco. Dennis. Again, with all the concern about alternatives to class size increases and furloughs and teacher layoffs, what are you proposing to keep the cuts away from the classroom?
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and thank everybody here. You know, Marina is actually the home of the Marina Penguins, and it feels like we're all out on an ice floe together out here. But it's great to be together. Now, we don't believe, just as many people have said, you cannot balance the budget on the backs of the children. We don't believe you can do it on the backs of the workers either. And we have people who have dedicated their lives to taking care of children to make sure that children will be able to take care of all the rest of us in the future. And it isn't really fair to punish them. So what should you do? First thing you should do is think about what it takes to build a budget. And when you think about what it takes to build a budget, a lot of people look at numbers. But in schools, it takes a child. You put a child in front of you. put a teacher next to the child, give that child a book, and you build your budget out from there. What do you need to support? It means you don't do things quite the same way you've always done them. And that's got to infect the rest of the school district. The school district has a lot of property, and it's good property. 135 Van Ness sits as a shell. There are some administrative offices in it. The building across the street from it is 22 stories high. That means that building could house the School of the Arts for the first 5 or 6 floors, and could house offices, a hotel, something that would bring money into the school district. And we've got to start thinking about those kinds of things. We've got to start thinking about creative ways to save money. Every one of these schools has copying machines, and teachers live on copying machines. But if you centralize all the copying, and you put the copies on the truck, then your Thursday newsletter, instead of costing 3 or 4 cents a page, costs less than a penny. Those are the kinds of things we must get involved in and must go forward with. But one more thing, Michael. People have talked about how we've got to show the governor. March 4th, we hope to have... March 4th, we hope to have everybody in this room, every one of their relatives, and everyone else who can fit into Civic Center Plaza at 5 o'clock so that we can demonstrate that we are not going to take this anymore, that we are not going to accept cuts anymore, that the change must be made. If anyone leaves here without signing the Lakoff petition or the California petition to lower the parcel tax, shame on you. You've got to take action, and you've got to do it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Could I ask Mary Perry from the front to come up? She's Deputy Director of EdSource again, and talk, if you would, Mary, about some ways that might actually increase efficiency and effectiveness in terms of getting state to be aware of the fact that this budget has to make room for education funding.
Part of the challenge, I think, in California is convincing people that the schools, in fact, don't have enough money. And part of the problem in doing that is because we have an extraordinarily complex set of rules around how the state moves money to school districts. And so trying to justify the funding that goes to schools and show that it's well spent is very difficult in California. So simplifying that system, demanding that our leaders simplify that system, that they also look at every single set of rules. There are 11 volumes in the Ed Code. It stands about this tall. Look at each of those. Are they helping kids? And if they're not, why do we have them? Beginning to really be clear about the extent to which if the state controls the funding in California, then it needs to understand where that money is going and in turn think very carefully about how it's used. And that's not an easy thing. Everybody has their favorite program they want to protect. And so I think that's a real challenge here. It's one of many things that could happen. But I've been at this for over 20 years, talking about trying to improve funding for schools in California. And I think that we have to really get very clear that this isn't a short-term problem, and it's not a problem in San Francisco, and that what we have to do is really hold our state leaders accountable for their part in this.
Thank you. Since Mary touched on state mobilization, which is clearly a part of the necessity of working towards solutions, before again we hear from our final 2 state senators, I wanted to ask if Debbie Look, who's Legislative Director of the State Parent PTA, would come up. And Debbie, could you address for us what the State PTA is doing? You got about 1 million members. Get them mobilized against budget cuts, and how San Francisco parents can get involved?
Yes, I'd be happy to. We've got a three-pronged approach right now, which we are just in the process of rolling out. Tomorrow we'll have information coming out on our website and through our email system on our 9 Million Reasons to Speak Up campaign. There's over 9 million children in the state of California under 18 years of age that need us to speak on their behalf. We've got instructions on sending letters, visiting your legislators, the governor, the key policymakers, rallies in your communities, letters to the editor. We need to mobilize not only parents but other community members as well to understand that money spent on education is not an expenditure, it's an investment. If we want to see a future, if we want a successful economy in the future, we know we need more, not fewer college graduates. We need to prepare our children to be successful in school, all the way from preschool through higher education, and that takes money. It's an investment. Our second area is we are leading the petition drive to qualify the Local Control of Local Classrooms Funding Act, the reduction of the parcel tax threshold to 55%. So we are urging everyone to get involved in helping collect those signatures. We've been told that no one has ever qualified a ballot measure without paid signature gatherers in the state of California, and we intend to be the first. So I urge you to help me with that. And finally, our third approach is, after much consideration, we have decided to sign on as a principal plaintiff in a lawsuit against the state of California. We are joining the California School Boards Association and the Association of California School Administrators in a lawsuit that will contend that the funding system in California is unconstitutional.
Thank you, Debbie. And now I would like to go to Senators Leland Yee and Mark Leno. And Senator Yee, could you talk, if you would, about what revenue measures you're going to propose to bridge the funding gap?
First off, let me again, as all of my colleagues have done, thank all of you for coming. This is a rather difficult time for all of us, not only in Sacramento, but throughout this country and throughout the state and many cities and towns. I spent 8 years on the San Francisco Board of Education. Along with Tom Amiano and some of my colleagues, we really did some great work. We helped pass a number of bond measures, GO bond, we did a Mello-Roos, we did a sales tax, we collected developer fees, on and on and on, because we felt that we needed to invest in public education. We needed to find any and every way to increase the funding for our children. And when you then go up to Sacramento and you start seeing the essence of public education being eliminated, reduced, and sometimes just wiped away, it is a sad state of affairs. All of us don't want that to happen, and all of us are in a rather difficult bind. You know, part of the difficulties in terms of generating new revenues is that we are captive of a minority. And that minority basically says that we're not going to raise taxes, we're not going to go and raise and increase any revenues whatsoever. And so what I have done is to take an extraordinary step, and that is that in the last several years, I have voted against any cuts to public education. That is not easy to do. It is not easy to do because we all want to kind of go along and work along and try to solve our budget problem. But there comes a time when you cut $17 billion, you have to ask yourself, why are you there? When you are looking at losing 20,000 teachers and about 10,000 classified employees in the last several years, you start asking yourself, what are you doing there? And so what I think we've got to do, and I know that this is sometimes rather violent and maybe somewhat not going along with the flow, is that we've got to ask ourselves, do we vote for a budget that cuts education? And I would say you can't do that. And I would urge all of you to ask all of your representatives up and down the state of California that if you care about public education, then don't vote for any cuts. You know, it's rather interesting. It's rather interesting that every year we talk about raising new revenues. We talk about raising taxes for this and that so that we in some way can bring back a lot of the programs and a lot of the assistance for our children in our public schools. And every time the Republicans will say no. And every time we kind of push them along, they say no. And they don't blink. But you know what? We end up blinking. We end up making those cuts. And we are tired, I am tired of doing that. And when we go up to the Capitol each day and we ask the question, what are you going to do to help education? Those Republicans basically say, there's enough money. And so we then retreat back and we then say to ourselves, well, if they're not willing to give us the money to fund public education, then the only way we're going to balance this budget is to make those cuts. And we've done that time and time again, and I am not going to do that. And that's what we have got to say. You know, we say how you stand up for education. You stand up for education by standing in front of any of those cuts coming through. And all of us need to protect against those cuts and prevent any more cuts to public education. That's my commitment. That's what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm going to continue to do.
Thank you, Senator Yee. Senator Leno, what are you going to continue to do?
You bet. Well, let me also thank the Marina Middle School family and the principal for your hospitality tonight. And in a time of crisis, I think it's important that we do, first and foremost, count our blessings. And we are blessed with a talented and committed Board of Education, a fierce superintendent who works well with our Board of Education. We've got a politically savvy and tenacious Unified Educators of San Francisco. And we've got a mayor and a board of supervisors who get education. So we're better situated than many other locales in the state. I want to just review where we're at and how this all came to pass. Many of us back in 1978 forewarned that exactly this crisis would happen if Prop 13 were passed. We had the best educational system in the entire nation prior to Prop 13. And now look what's happened these 30-some years later. So just recently, Governor Schwarzenegger fulfilled a campaign promise and on his first day in office slashed a 50-year-old vehicle license fee that sustained this state through the second half of the 20th century, the golden years of California. He knew better. That has now cost the state $30 billion general fund dollars over the past 6 years. Imagine $30 billion if we could have that back. The benefit to the average car owner, $200 a year. Add on top of that this global crisis that Arnold Schwarzenegger's candidate for president, George Bush, was so instrumental in causing, has now cut state revenues by $25 billion from year to year. A $25 billion loss. Money just gone. So, it's a crisis. It's a crisis. I would like to see us galvanize the energy in this room to start a statewide movement of PTAs and other school advocates to counter the craziness of the Tea Party. And this statewide movement would fight to restore the vehicle license fee to where it had been for 50 years. Now that would be worth about $6 billion annually if we could pull it off, and I'm not suggesting it would be an easy task. And K through 14 would get 50% of that $6 billion, $3 billion annually for every year that comes to pass. Now, until that happens, I've been working on a bill for a number of years, which the governor vetoed a few years back. It was a district bill just for San Francisco. It would have allowed our Board of Supervisors to put on the ballot a measure to allow San Francisco voters to decide for themselves whether or not to restore their own vehicle license fee here in San Francisco. And I believe San Francisco voters would approve that, and it's worth $70 million a year. And why I'm so confident, aside from the applause we just got for it, is that we have universal support. The San Francisco Chamber of Commerce has been a big advocate for this. The San Francisco Labor Council, our mayor, and our Board of Supervisors all are in agreement that we should put this on our ballot, and San Francisco voters would support it. So $70 million right there. I would like to see that $70 million split between our school district and our Muni, which needs that money so very, very much. I had another wacky idea of a San Francisco legislator, didn't go too far, but a 1% surcharge, dare call it a tax, on every entertainment ticket sold in California. So a $10 movie ticket would cost an extra 10 cents. A $100 opera ticket would cost an extra $1, and we would raise about $40 million annually, which should go to the California Arts Council so we can restore art and music education in our school. So those are some revenue measures, and at the same time, we've had some success with the bill that we got into our budget last year, which reforms our parole system, our probation system. We've got legislation this year which will reform our parole system so we can cut our recidivism, lower our inmate population, so we can finally reduce our costs in the prison system. Michael, I think with this gathering here tonight, Tea Partiers, beware.
Hey, you stole a little of my thunder, Mark. I was thinking that the Tea Party analogy was a damn good one. Thank you for that. From the other side of the political spectrum in what is called in Washington, San Francisco politics, proud of it, too.
Yeah.
What we're going to do now is actually invite you in the audience to ask questions. I know there are many that you have. There are some ground rules here. We're going to alternate between questions that were previously submitted through the website, and we'll take live questions from you in the audience. There's a microphone for you to line up behind in the rear of the auditorium. Simply come forward one at a time. I'm going to ask you to be on your best honor behavior here. In fact, I'll have to cut you off at the knees if you don't follow the rules here. 30 seconds per question, one question, no follow-up, 2 to 3 minutes for the answer, and 15 minutes prior I'll indicate that only 5 minutes is left for questions. At the end, if you didn't have your question answered, or if you have a question, you can email or call your representative directly, and contact information is in the program that was given to you this evening. And once again, I want to say, and I think it's pretty obvious, but nevertheless worth saying, the people who put this event on deserve an enormous amount of credit just for how well it's organized. Okay, let's go. I feel like I should say the number to call is, but that's the first question here, and by the way, you know we have representatives of over 70 schools here this evening? That in itself is really enough. This is submitted by Lisbeth from Grattan School, and she wants to know, she has her own fan club. What are the real solutions to the legislative dysfunction in Sacramento? How much time do we have here?
I'll just jump in real quick. Changing or ending term limits, getting rid of the two-thirds majority, both those things would go a very long, long way.
And how about electing a governor that understands the way government works, what programs are important, and how to work with legislators?
Michael, one other thought. Let's elect 2/3 Democrats throughout the state so we can get to that threshold whether we change it or not.
Leland, did you want a word in here too? We get all state representatives. Just
No,
a quick word?
I believe that absolutely the only way in which we're going to be able to change the system, I mean, all the 2/3 and this and that, it's going to be, I think, rather a difficult task because while we live in this paradise, the rest of the state sometimes does not go along with us. But I think the most important thing that we can do and fix the system, not tomorrow and not the next day and so on, but right now, and I think it's what marked it. We need more Democrats. We need individuals who are going to say that we want to fund education, we will vote for education, we will vote for the revenues that's going to fund the education, and that's the only way we're going to change the system tomorrow, right away, because we need those money now.
Okay, like I said, we're going to be alternating. Gentlemen, the microphone, can you just tell us your first name and ask the question that's on your mind?
This is a question for pretty much this side of the panel here.
To my left, nothing necessarily political about that, you mean, yes. Yeah.
Here we are. There are three ideas I'm wondering which of these three can you get behind. Number one, Dennis Kelly alluded to the fact that there is hundreds of millions of dollars of surplus property that's not being used by the school district that can be used for efficiency. I'm not talking about selling it. I'm talking about doing what we did at Fifth Market, Nordstrom. Use it more efficiently. Can we make some money out of it? Number two, we get paid in accordance with how many people show up to our schools, how many students show up. Yet we have been trying desperately to get the school district to reduce the truancy rate so we can recoup some of the tens of millions of dollars we lose every year. Can you get behind a program to do that? Number three, Dennis Kelly and Superintendent Garcia. We already are paying a parcel tax, $98 a year. Can we renegotiate that part of the tax that is not already set in stone so that we can get some of that money out of the superfluous expenditures and back into the classrooms?
Abraham, thank you. Somehow that one question was turned into, I think, three. But Dennis Kelly is stepping up to the microphone here.
Your mic's not on.
Hello? There we go. We working now? I'm pleased to have that question because one of the things that was unique about Proposition A was that there was a signed memorandum of agreement between the district and the union about how the money was to be used. That means that there is a signed memorandum of agreement that we can go back and look at and see if there are ways to amend it to get some of that money back out. And the superintendent and the union have been talking about that, and we do hope that that's going to be part of the solution going forward.
How about the panel here? Who wants to step up to the plate? Superintendent? Go ahead.
I think what would be helpful, since we have legislators here, is, we tried before, San Francisco, in the last couple of years, we've been trying to get a bill passed that says that if, hypothetically, if we do sell a facility, could we have some flexibility on how to use those funds? Yeah. And, it sounds easy, but to this date, that hasn't passed. So that's a problem for us because, sometimes we would like to invest those in different types of things, especially when it comes to technology and other things that we can invest in this city of ours. But we're very limited in terms of even if we sell a facility, what we could use that facility for. We are looking at a lot of different options in terms of using our property to get other businesses to work on joint ventures with us, all the way from teacher housing to a lot of different things on a lease where we would actually make some income, and at the same time the developer could make some income. Those things are being explored.
Teacher housing.
And if I may,
Mayor Newsom.
At peril, and I know we want to get to the questions, this truancy and dropout issue, I'm very committed to trying to address. About a year ago, Patricia Gray, principal of Balboa High School, came in on one of my open door days. And Patricia demanded that I wake up to this issue. I was trying to explain to her what the city was doing through the Department of Children, Youth, and Family and some of the funding we had to CBOs and other things. And she said, you just don't get it. And I challenged her to explain to me what I didn't get. And here's what she did. She brought me out, and we started knocking on doors of families with kids that weren't showing up to school. And that process was a big eye-opener, because I realized very quickly what all of you already knew, that the school district will never on its own address the issue of truancy and dropout, that this is a community issue, and these are families in crisis, and that we need to step up to the plate and we need to be supportive. The challenge was, we went out over the course of multiple days, and I only got to about 15 or 20 households. And I asked for the list of the number of truant kids and saw it was in the thousands and thousands. And so about 6 months ago, I called Carlos Garcia and other members of the school district, and we brought them over to my office. I think, Carlos, we had about 20 folks in the room. And we worked out, even though there were lawyers involved, that I would have the opportunity. I didn't do this correctly at first, but now I am. We have a memorandum of understanding. And I spend my Saturdays, and I'm not exaggerating, I did 128 calls last Saturday, where I'm calling the families of these truant kids and making sure that their needs, to the extent possible, are being met. I don't know that we have nearly scratched the surface on what we can do. My point is, I say this not to impress, but to impress upon you, that we need to dramatically do things differently if we're going to get serious about the truancy and dropout rates. And I think we have a good process now to begin to start substantively addressing it.
If I can just state really quickly, though, I am absolutely committed to finding ways to raise revenue through our surplus property, but also our existing school sites. And one of the things that Vice President Mendoza and I are absolutely committed to is working through this on Buildings and Grounds Committee. One of course, and it's not just our staff's fault, we actually have to cut a lot of our central office staff because we're trying to save our teachers in the classroom. So we're educators, we're not necessarily developers and real estate folks. We do need help and support on this, but we absolutely want to use valuable property, raise revenues for our school. And two, before we get tons of emails about how we should bring soda to 135 NS, I just want to point out that it will cost us over $100 million to renovate 135 NS for it to be legally used by students. So that is for 400 students, and this is a school for 400 students. I just wanted to point that out before we start getting flooded with all of those emails. There is a cost for us moving that school there.
David Chu, you want to say a word here? Because I want to go back to the audience. There are a lot of people with questions, but please, if you would.
Well, the only thing I would add is I think we all know that in recent years we have not been doing as good a job for our families, right? We have had significant family flight, and I know that all of my colleagues at the Board of Education, the Mayor, we're trying to figure out what we need to do as far as affordable housing, what we need to do as far as muni, what we need to do to bolster our after-school programs, our child care programs. It goes on and on and on. And I think the sooner we can all join in moving this family-friendly agenda together, again, hopefully we will see those numbers come up and see our per pupil monies be able to increase.
Thank you. Gentleman over here, please.
In the arts or music programs in this district, and all teachers of the arts, so please raise your hand or stand up.
They look hungry.
This is my question. We are seeing many school districts in our state already cutting arts programs. This is very evident from what we've read in the papers and heard on TV. In contrast to this trend, how do our state legislators, in partnership with the school district and the city of San Francisco, plan to maintain the arts as part of the basic curriculum for all students in these times of devastating budget deficits? And anyone can talk to that.
Appreciate the issue being raised. You know, every study and report that we've seen documents repeatedly that students who study art and music test better in reading, math, and science. They have higher levels of self-esteem and lower rates of dropping out. And yet we rank 51st, not 50, 51st out of 50 states in the nation because Guam spends more per capita than California. The entertainment capital of the world. This is scandalous. And at the height of the dot-com boom, we had invested about $37 million of general fund money for the California Arts Council, which issues grants to schools and community-based organizations for arts education programs. That was about $1 per capita. Today we're at 3 cents per capita. So I am convinced we need an independent source of revenue so that arts education is not held hostage to the vagaries of our budget process every year. And that's why I mentioned this surcharge on an entertainment ticket here in California. We will probably have to take that to the ballot too because of this 2/3 threshold to raise any kind of money in the legislature. But we really do need a new and dedicated revenue source for arts education because we are failing our students horribly.
I want to remind all of you that we're going to be alternating with questions that were submitted from the website, and over 1,000 questions were submitted online. Here's a question for you, Mary Perry, and I think an important one for people to hear about from your perspective. How do successful, this is from Kim from Claire Lilienthal, how do successful states fund their education system, and how can we get California there, and who should be our role model?
Well, California is really almost the only state where the state really truly controls controls how much money local schools get. Unlike almost any place else in the country, our school districts our communities cannot raise money to support their own schools in meaningful ways. We've talked about the parcel tax, but that doesn't really raise very much money. Proposition 13 effectively removed the funding, the ability of communities to assess themselves to support their schools. That's the biggest difference between California and other states. Another thing that's happened in other states is they've had adequacy lawsuits where the courts have come in and said you have to provide enough for your students. It's complicated issues, but that is really a place where California is different. And we all know the political third rail that Proposition 13 is. But perhaps you don't talk about reversing it, you talk about amending it.
Let me actually pick up on that, if I may, and go to you on this, Tom Amano, because there's certainly a movement to try to move Proposition 13 toward, for example, commercial properties without necessarily infringing on just personal property.
That's that is the intent of my bill, which is to close that loophole, particularly for large banks, insurance companies. I see Jim Lazarus sitting down there, but really closing that loophole. There's a fantasy in Prop 13 that some of that money that does not come to us now goes to Sacramento, and then there's a subvention, and then it comes back to the district. I'm waiting, since 1978. So what my bill is proposing is to close that loophole. Now, we may be able to do that by statute. We may be able to do that by a resolution, and then we may also have to go back to the voter. But obviously, this is something that has not been on the table previously, and again, it's overdue. And it is a very, very pernicious piece of legislation.
Michael, could I just slightly add on that? Yeah. Just real briefly. There are those who would argue that back in 1978, Prop 13 wasn't intended to be a tax break for commercial property owners. It was to keep elderly residents in their homes who couldn't keep up with ever-rising property tax rates. It wasn't supposed to be for commercial properties, but the situation now is, and we've seen in this extraordinary, unprecedented downturn in the economy, so many commercial property owners are coming to our assessors to say we need our property's low value assessment lowered, and so we can lower our property tax. But they don't want to see that reassessment when times are good and their properties are escalating in price. So there's an inconsistency in their own arguments, and anyone who comes to the assessor to have a lower assessment in these low times should be expected to see their assessment increase in good times. It's only consistent.
Right. And remember, we're just closing the loophole. We're not going after that other part of Prop 13 that allows many of our seniors to exist in their homes. So that's not the point of the bill. The bill is to close that enormous loophole, which could generate billions for us.
Gentleman over here by the microphone, please.
Hi, my name is Brian, and 80-year-old daughter is housebound you, and she's flourishing there, I'm glad to say. I'm unemployed. I'm a property owner. And when you talk about a property parcel tax, I want you to know that I pay nearly $9,000 in tax a year, and my neighbor pays $800. So when you talk about creating a bandwagon for a parcel tax for property owners, I hope you'll consider some sort of progressive tax instead of a flat tax. When I came here tonight, I thought about what can I say, what can I contribute, what can we specifically do here? Because platitudes are great. Nice posters, trademarks, whatever. But, they only last for about a day, and then you got to face the hangover the next morning. And I did a little research, and I should say I'm a fairly simple person. I usually rely on Michael Krasny to try to sort out most of what's going on, and it's a difficult task, believe me. When I look to support my political leaders, those people I elect, I really can't sort out all the constituencies. In addition to my own immediate family, I know there are other and I'm interested in education for my child, just like everybody else here. I have a brother who's schizophrenic, whose Medi-Cal payments are being cut. He no longer can see a doctor. He has no teeth in his mouth. Okay, he lives on $900 a month in a boarding care. He's getting cut. So who am I to say education should come before Medi-Cal or any of these other priorities? But when I look at the legislators who I want to elect, I do it on trust. It's not unlike going to a doctor or an auto mechanic. And I did a little research, just a little bit on the web, and I noticed. Well, let me start with another platitude. Charity starts at home. A cliche. Charity starts at home. I did a little looking at the budget for the legislature and legislative staffs. And I was a legislative assistant in Capitol Hill for about 5 years. And I know that a lot of my function was to make sure that my congressman got reelected, constituent services.
I'm sorry, could I get you to ask a question?
To move
here?
along?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is this. I did a little research and I noticed that, Fiona Ma, you spend $500,000 just on salaries to support 10 staffers in your office. Alice Fong Yu needs something like $200,000 this year. Is it a priority for you to have $500,000 in staff and whatever you spend on real, your own incumbency? And I don't mean to single you out, but I didn't have that much time because I noticed that, the legislative branch allows for $70 million a year. That's just for the assembly, right? There's 1,192 staffers in the assembly and something like 1,000 for the Senate. And and $63 million in the Senate for staffers. I'd be willing to do without the newsletters. I'd be willing to do without constituent services provided at the office. But can I have $200,000? And if not, why?
I think you've made the point.
But you want to respond, no doubt.
Well, I will just say I am the majority whip in the State Assembly, and as part of the leadership group, I do have staff to not only take care of the 400,000 constituents that I represent, but also to help with the Democratic leadership, getting other Democrats elected so we don't have to keep being worried about the two-thirds. I work pretty much 24/7. As many people know, we took an 18% pay cut. We cut our own salaries 10% in the legislature. I pay for my own car, my own phone, and so, thank you. Well,
a listener, there we go again. Actually, let me say something about Fiona Ma, because I think a commendation is in order here. There were, as some of you know, there were cuts from the domestic violence shelters, and we did a program on Forum about it.
That's right.
And because of her leadership singularly, I want to just mention this, the cuts were restored. If we can do that in education...
And to all fairness, Senator Leland Yee also took a very strong stand on that, and I am the chair of the Domestic Violence Select Committee, and so that is a priority for us as well.
Yeah, and KQED didn't hurt the cause either. Let's just add that for the record. This is a question from, somebody, Rachel from McKinley. And this kind of information I think is important, and I'll defer to you, Superintendent Garcia. Who will be making final budgeting decisions, and how will priorities be decided and communicated, and how can we influence the priority of the cuts? Let's talk about that first from the city, and then we'll talk about it from any of the state legislators who want to step up.
Well, we're going to have a series of lots of meetings. We're in San Francisco. We're going to have lots of meetings. People will have an opportunity to, hopefully clarify, because unfortunately there's a lot of misinformation out there. So it'll give everybody an opportunity to step up and ask any question they want. And, if they want to know, we have quite a few hearings set up. There's a budget hearing on March 3rd at Horace Mann, March 10th at Marshall High School, and March 11th at Francisco Middle School, and they're all at 6 p.m. You could go on our website. We'll have all of those. But we want everybody to be involved, because sometimes people say we're not transparent. And we're a public entity. Everything that we do is open to the public. The priorities, we've gone through every single thing, because one of the things that the governor and the legislature did this year is they took all, before we used to argue that we should have flexibility with all the different funding sources that the state gave us. They used to dictate how we had to use everything. But now that there's a crisis, they took away our money, but they said now you have flexibility with these things. And so what we're doing is we're sweeping all those things, and the idea is let's try to protect as much as we can the schools. So we're going to sweep those funds. We're putting them in to the general fund to just keep us afloat. And we're doing all those types of things. We have a lot of proposals out there with our bargaining units that we're going to look at, we're going to explore. Unfortunately, we may have to even decrease the school year. But those are things, if you look around the state of California, I just want to remind everybody that we're Johnny-come-lately to this horrible mess, because we had the rainy day fund. If you go around all of California for the last 2 years, everybody's already started all this chopping. So now it's our turn. But we are going to make this very open. We want the priorities. Finally, when you say who's going to pass this, it's the school board. We will make a recommendation after getting input, but ultimately the school board will pass the budget, because by law we have to submit a balanced budget by June 30th.
Can we get a good, succinct, and cogent version of what goes on in the state process? I must confess to you, as many of you know, I've done many programs on the state budget, and I realized one night before doing one of those programs, I was in my dream sitting in a state budget meeting, and I woke up and realized I was in a nightmare.
Michael, I chair the Budget Subcommittee on Health and Human Services, which also gives me a seat on the overall Budget Committee. And we have made the decision, given that we don't know what our revenues will be until the May revision after the taxes come in by April 15th, that we are not going to make any decisions on education and health and human services until we have a clear idea of what we're doing, so we won't make cuts that we would only have to regret later. And given that revenues in January were $1.28 billion more than we had projected, if we can repeat that for a few more months, we're going to have hopefully $3, $4, $5 billion that we hadn't expected and planned in our current year budget. So that reviving economy could save us a lot of the pain. But I also want you to pay attention. You may be reading next week, because we're going to be taking up in the legislature something very arcane and complex called the gas tax swap. In the governor's version of the gas tax swap, he actually proposes another tax cut at the pump, which would hurt the general fund by about another $800 million. Of course, that would impact the Prop 98 figures, and education would take another multi-$100 million hit. We are proposing our own gas tax swap, which will not only protect education and the Prop 98 level, but will also put up $400 million for public transit so that Muni can get reinvested and our kids can get to school.
Good.
Thank you, Mark. Gentleman over here, please.
My name is Steve Sachs. I have a son at Alvarado School in the Spanish immersion program. I would like to commend the school board for working on the immersion programs in specific. I appreciate those. I want to thank the organizers of this event and to the panelists and all the guests for coming here, echoing that. My specific question is, I think that there's a bit of preaching to the choir here. I think we're all on the same team, and I think there's a lot of agreement here, by all the applause that's going on. I think one thing that keeps coming up is the parcel tax and Proposition 13 and amending that. What are the real political sacrifices that need to be made in order to get some reform done on Proposition 13 and property tax? People have been trying to change this for years. What really needs to happen? What kind of bargaining needs to go on at the state level to get it passed and to get more money into the schools?
I'll jump in really quickly. Actually, it's all about political will. There really hasn't been a cohesive attempt to change Prop 13. And many times in the state legislature, as you know, the buck stops with us. So the bill I've introduced with the support of my colleagues is going to have to be connected to, it's all about the statutory definitions of change of ownership. So then we would create a split role in and around commercial property. But it will take statute, which the bill could accomplish. It would take a resolution, as we understand from our legal counsel, and here's the big one, cooperation of the governor. Now, the governor will not be hasta la vista, I'll be back. He's not going to be back. So if he doesn't cooperate this go round, we will have a new governor. But I feel that I do have an activist background from years and years ago, and when you do grassroots organizing, and we certainly now have the benefit of technology that we didn't have years ago, the net and tweeting and blogs, we could build a statewide movement so that we do amend Prop 13 so it stops decimating our schools. So it would be a political action on the part of all the constituencies, legislation, executive office, localities, and then connecting them to a statewide campaign.
Thank you. Here's Matthew from also McKinley School says, what has to change in California to make change happen? We've talked about two-thirds majority. We've talked about the necessity perhaps to mobilize, which is what this evening is about to a great extent. Anything else that comes to mind, though? I think that's an important question just in terms of actions that maybe we haven't surveyed in this time together.
Well, something that we are talking about is tax reform. Right now, 85% of our state's revenues comes from individual income tax, corporate taxes, and sales tax. And when people don't have jobs, corporations are not doing well, people don't have money to spend on goods, that's the problem. And so our tax system was set up 30 years ago. And we have changed a lot in terms of the way we do business, the types of businesses that are here, where we are spending money, what kind of goods we are purchasing. And that is one thing that we really need to do, but it requires, again, political will. It's going to require two-thirds because we're going to have to maybe increase taxes but decrease certain taxes. So even though it could be a net, effect in the end. If we want to increase taxes, we need 2/3, and that is kind of the problem that we're having. So, like Tom said, again, it's the political will, it's both parties, it's the governor wanting to sign a type of tax reform bill to match this 21st century economy.
Leland, you.
There have been a number of questions about what kind of structural changes can we make within the Capitol to better address some of the issues that we are facing. I think there have been a number of proposals talked about. I think Assemblymember Ma talked about changes in our tax system. There was a blue ribbon committee on tax reform, bipartisan. I think some business-oriented, others are not, and we couldn't even adopt any of those particular proposals because there is not the kind of collaboration that I think should happen in the Capitol. I don't think that we're going to be able to take care of some of those structural changes because if we could, we would have done it a long time ago. The reason why we can't change Prop 13 is that the polling just doesn't allow us a pathway for success. And I think that ultimately what we've got to do, and many of you are involved in statewide organizations, we've got to get out there in other parts of the state of California, and we've got to somehow begin that discussion about children and education being a priority and making sure that those individuals that we elect are going to then understand the priorities of our children and our education. If we don't do that, we will still be subject to this difficult situation of being controlled by a minority. So my takeaway for all of you is that we've got to look at long term. And I think that my colleagues here are talking about long term, about possibilities of these bills passing and so on. And we've got to work with them. We've got to support them and do everything that we can. But I don't want you to walk away tonight thinking that the magic bullet has been found and we're going to take care of the problems tomorrow. The Board of Education and this superintendent, they're going to have to make some tough decisions because the cuts are coming. And unless we somehow prevent those cuts from happening, they're coming. And on with your May letters or your March letters, going to be turned into May letters. And what this city has got to do, working with the mayor and working with the Board of Supervisors and the school board and all of us, is to then figure out with the monies that we have right now, with the GO bonds, with the Mello-Roos, with the sales tax, with all the stimulus dollars, whatever the dollars may be, we as a city and as a community need to sit down and figure out what the priorities are, and somehow we may have to cut. And we have got to all come together as a community, as San Franciscans, as parents and community individuals, business individuals, and figure out what our priorities are going to be. Because those immediate decisions have got to be made. I hope we don't have to make them, but we've got to be prepared because we don't want to scramble at the last minute, at the last hour, on the last night in order to then pass this particular budget by June 30th. And so I would just, all of us, urge that after tonight that we go back to our drawing boards tomorrow morning and figure out then how do we set that process forward to come together as a community, as a city, to figure out how we're going to deal with this education problem that we're facing.
Commissioner Kim, you wanted to come in here, please.
I just want to say that I think we all know what reforms we need to make in Sacramento. And as Tom said, actually there really hasn't been a concerted, unified, organized statewide movement to make those reforms possible. And so I think the magic bullet is courage. And I hate to throw it back on us, but we have to change. We have to make these changes. A lot of these structural impediments that we have in Sacramento were brought in by a supposedly democratic initiatives process that we have here in California, where actually it's just the people with the most money that can put the message out wins, right? So the people that benefit from this initiative process are the people with more money, and it protects them. And we have to make those structural changes. So I think the magic bullet is courage. And the polling right now says that we can't reform Prop 13, that we can't pass a simple majority for budget and tax revenue. But this is what Republicans do. When they see a poll and it doesn't look favorable to them, they go out there and they start doing advocacy and they start changing how people perceive that message. And we need to do that. We need to change how people think so they start voting for these reforms. Change is not going to happen. And I feel, in some ways, I feel very sad saying it, but unfortunately we're going to have to do it. It's not going to be the elected officials sitting here behind the podium. I mean, there are things that we can do. There are leadership roles that we can take, but the state has to make that change. It's going to be us.
Dennis Kelly, you wanted the word in here. Go ahead.
Thank you very much again. There are a couple of things that I would like you to know about. One, when you talk about political courage, actually our own assessor recorder in San Francisco has a close the loophole movement that has been building since last year. And that is something that I think we can start off by supporting that. He has a website for that and all that. When you talk about converting other voters, I want you to know that after March the 4th, on March the 5th, the California Federation of Teachers and a number of other groups are getting together, starting in Bakersfield, to walk up the state to California. They are going to take 48 days to do it, and they're going to sit down in some of those communities and look for people who look like us, people who shop like us, people who drive the same kind of cars, have the same kind of income, and try to get to them and talk to them about how votes must be changed in the Valley, how the different group of people must be elected in order to get us out of this and keep from having the kind of blockage that we see in Sacramento. Thank you.
Is that Phil Tank at the microphone?
Come on up, Phil.
This is our close the loophole guy. Phil, let's get you up here.
Thank you, Dennis. Well, as someone who's got a 3-year-old daughter, I, like many of you, am very, very concerned about public education and, frankly, the direction of not just our city but our state. And what Dennis said is I see the inequities of Prop 13 every single day. I see it in my office. I see how, frankly, the rules that we as homeowners have aren't the same rules as other people. So I did start an effort about almost a year ago called Close the Loophole. It's very simple. If you want to go to our website, closetheloophole.com. If you're on Facebook, join us on Close the Loophole. People say that people don't want to reform Prop 13. Well, I see about maybe 1,000 people in here tonight that think that's not such a bad idea. Jane Kim's right. All of us, we can have our opinions, but you all need to be the change that you want to be. And the only way you can do that, and one way you can do that, is join our effort. Because what we've been trying to do is prove people wrong, that people do want to change Prop 13. That we can talk to people and educate them. The polling does say that a lot of people like Prop 13. But only 1/3 of the voters right now actually understand that the protections you get as homeowners are given to every single big building in downtown San Francisco, given to the ballpark, given to the power plant. Every single large commercial property across the state is given the same protection that you get as homeowners. So again, to me, that's an unintended consequence. That's a loophole. And I think we should close it. So if you can join us at close... So if you can do one thing tonight for me, for our kids, join us on that website, because I think we need to send a message to people that we do care, we don't think it's fair, and that the time has come for sane tax reform. So again, thanks so much for being here tonight, and thanks to PPS for organizing this great thing.
Thank you, Phil. I know that you are anxious to get home to your children, and I hope you're fired up, because you really can make a difference. I think we've heard many good ideas this evening. Before I turn things over to CeCe Kaufman to conclude the evening. I'm sorry. I was getting the sign that we've ended the time. If everybody's willing to stay here, we have 2 people at the microphones. Okay.
Okay, I'm a San Francisco Unified School District teacher of 13 years. I got a speech here, so I need the time. A father of 2 young girls, the oldest of which is at Lafayette Elementary School. And this is addressed to Mr. Garcia. The current state of your proposed budget cuts are unacceptable. I am shocked on how quickly the suggestion of increasing class size of kindergarten through 3rd grade to 30 was placed on the table. How quickly was that? How can we talk about social justice and equity when these kind of suggestions are made so quickly with no innovative solutions being suggested? And of course, after increasing class size, we turn to teacher salaries, cutting their pay by freezing their step increases and imposing furloughs are shameful suggestions. You cannot take this budget crisis out on teachers and the students they serve. The cuts in salaries need to come from the top. They need to be dramatic. No school district employee should be making over $83,000 during this budget crisis. Bloated salaries and the size of administrative bureaucracy needs to be dramatically slashed. How many administrators do we really need? It seems that a new administrative position is created every day under some vague umbrella of social justice. Mr. Garcia, I feel you should lead the way in this reduction by downsizing central office in an absolutely transparent fashion. Don't just give us a figure. Tell us who and what was let go, the expense of who and what is being kept and why. Don't tell us the budget is online. How are we supposed to make sense of all the acronyms and jargon that dominate the budget? That is not transparency. And I'm almost done. I'm almost done. I'm almost done.
I understand your grievances. I want the superintendent to respond to you. The idea is not for you to go through a screen. I want the superintendent to respond to you.
I'm almost done. In all of your proposed cuts, I do not see a single innovative thought or suggestion of how we might be able to use the money that we do have in a different and more efficient way. Can we really justify all of the administrative departments that currently exist? We need to take a look at the spending and hiring practices of this district as a whole. If we knew this was coming, why have we spent millions of dollars on outside consultants and added several layers to the administration? We knew this was coming. We had a couple of years to respond to this. We were all aware of state politics. This crisis is not a surprise. We were bailed out by the rainy day fund for 2 years in a row, but yet our behavior has not changed. So we find ourselves in this current crisis acting like it's some kind of surprise. Okay? I know that your response will be, times are tough and there's no other way but to cut teacher salaries and increase class size. There is another way. The majority of the sacrifices need to come from the top, and frankly, I have seen nothing that suggests that people who have the most influence in making these decisions are willing to sacrifice. Open the books in a truly transparent way. Your proposed cuts are not only lack innovation, they are shameful, irresponsible, and unacceptable.
Okay, let me quiet things down here.
I would like to request.
I want to thank the gentleman because obviously he hit a nerve, and we were supposed to wrap things up, and I think it was important that you were heard. I'm glad that you were heard. No, if you have another screen, I'm sorry. I want the superintendent to respond because you had the opportunity to do that. And I'd like to hear what he has to say. He's asking for transparency. He's asking for accountability. He's saying, frankly, that you're too expanded. I should do an hour on this on forum, obviously.
Yeah. I understand your frustration, and I understand everybody's frustration on this issue. Before we even started to look at any other cuts, or if you really, and you will have an opportunity to see what we're proposing, before we even started that, off the top, we went out to find, I made a commitment to find over $45.5 million just in Central and all the other programs we could that we felt, like you said, they may not be necessary in this moment. They were good programs, but at this time, because of the financial issues, those aren't going to be our priority. So right away, we thought we were going to have originally, before the governor's speech, when he gave his State of the State in January, we thought we were going to have an $83 million deficit. So we acted, proacted, worked, and we went to find the furthest things that affected basically the classroom and the schools. So we went out there and we went through every single line item and we found over $45.5 million off the top to start. That's where we started. We said those are things I completely agree. We're not going to afford those things. So we took those off the top. Now, from that, if you look at, even if you took, okay, some people say eliminate the central office. Okay, that's a great idea. First of all, if you look at the percentage that we're spending at central office, I think you'd be surprised. But let's say we take $15 million. Okay, now we have a $100 million problem. The reality is that, I can assure you, let me have a say, in all due respect, I had an opportunity to listen to you, so please provide me the same.
If I were Obama, I'd say the two of you need to have a beer together.
Right. Anytime. You're on. But what we're going to try to do, and you will see when we have the hearings, we will lay out a plan of every single position. The only reason why I made those recommendations, just so that you know, and the public should know, is because we have to have a starting point. All of the things that we have to talk about are negotiable things with our collective bargaining units. So hypothetically, we had to put out, why did we send out 900 pink slips? Because we have to show that if somehow we don't negotiate things, we have to show how are we going to survive? How are we going to balance our budget? So when we put out those class sizes, when we put out those things, those are right now at this point are negotiable. It's possible that we may say, well, instead of doing that, we'd rather have more furlough days. Instead of doing this, we'd rather have that. Well, what we're going to do, excuse me, sir, what we're going to do is we're creating a menu so that we will have an intelligent discussion of what it is that we want and not want to do. I believe that that's being transparent.
All right. I'm going to have to cut this off. Thank you. Last question. Gentleman over here.
Mike.
Your mic's not on.
No. Try again.
Why don't you step up to this one? Yeah, go ahead.
We can hear you.
I think they're trying to tell us something. They're cutting off the mics here. We're going over time. Maybe that's.
Okay, here we go. So one of the guests here said that there's a lot of arcane rules for how money percolates down from the state to our children. And one of those that I see is the high stakes testing. And one of my question is, how much of our budget goes into preparing and administering these tests to our third graders? And can anyone in our state legislature let us have the money without making us go through making our third graders jump through hoops and making our teachers teach them the test?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, obviously it needs a lot of reform, and there's a lot of controversy about the standardized test and why we even give them to second grade. We do have a superintendent of school, a state superintendent of schools. There is a race. There's two people that I know that are very prominent that are running for state superintendent of schools, Gloria Romero and Tom Torlakson. I definitely would advise all of us to get involved with either their campaigns or their agendas, their attitudes, and their values, and talk to them about the standardized testing, because through them and the legislature, and then even the governor has his own point person for public education, we might see the kind of reform that you're suggesting.
If I can, before I introduce Cece Kaufman to wrap things up, I wanted to say, first of all, thank you all for showing your commitment by coming out again tonight. I don't know about all of you, but I'm walking away here feeling a lot more hopeful, frankly, because there have been a lot of good ideas, a lot of courses of action. And to sum it up, March 4th, you've heard about the parcel tax, and you've heard about statewide action that needs to be taken and needs to be mobilized. Let me thank our panelists, Senators Leno and Yee, Assemblyman Amiano and Ma, Mayor Newsom, Supervisor Chu, Superintendent Garcia, Commissioner Kim. And thank you to our special guests, Terry Burgessson, Dennis Kelly, Jim Lazarus, Debbie Look, and Mary Perry. And special thanks before C.C. Kaufman closes things tonight to the Public Education Funding Our Future Planning Committee, who did an extraordinary job. Crystal Brown, Holly Carver, C.C. Kaufman, Michelle Parker, Linda Schaefer. Thank you all.
What an evening this has been. I want to give a round of applause to the folks that are on stage, our special guests in the front row, our audience, the over 100 volunteers that today alone, we're here at 11 o'clock, setting up Child Watch, all the people that are running it behind the scenes. Every single school we reached out to, you to help bring this evening together. This was a parent event. There is no organization behind us. These are 6 moms from the Sherman Elementary who meet in the volunteer room. And you're all here tonight because you care about your kids and getting the best public school education that they can get. We've heard a lot here tonight. Some of it has been frustrating, some of it hopeful, some of it a little confusing, and some of it so obvious and straightforward, I wonder how any of us can deny that change needs to happen. That first change needs to happen with us. No longer can we sit back and trust that the system will work itself out or somebody's going to look out for the best interest of our children. We, you and I, need to be the advocates for changing the way public schools are funded in San Francisco and California. We collected your contact information. We will be back in touch with you. There are action items on the back of your program this evening. Please stay engaged. We are kicking off a parent movement. And together, we can do this. In all great instances of change, there is a turning point. A point in time when things are never the same. Tonight is that moment. Tonight is that moment of change, the turning point to better fund public education in California and in San Francisco. And I want you all to stand up. I want everybody to stand up and say, enough is enough. Enough is enough. I want to hear McKinley. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Everyone, enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. Thank you.